So I'm Jeff, and I'm here with
Dwayne.
We are going to discuss, among other things, the Vorkosigan Saga. So, for somebody that has never read or listened to the Vorkosigan Saga, Dwayne, what would be your quick synopsis of the series?
I believe it's, I guess the best way to put it would be in a science fiction fairy tale kind of aura. It'd be a prince that is born disfigured and is not accepted by his own kingdom, and therefore he has to fight to survive. Very much I would say, an amalgamation of Sparta meets Star Wars, if you will. I mean, he's got, and I do like the way that the way she frames it. Lois McMaster, Lois McMaster Bujold, right? Is that how you say it?
Yep.
Okay, so Lois McMaster Bujold, and but it's got a lot of life, a lot of love, and understanding family values, values of where you're from, protecting that, but also being open to understand new people's point of view. And I think the lesson I learned from that part was that if you don't open your eyes to those people and give them an opportunity, then you'll miss out in the long run. So, some cases it's tragedy, some cases it's it's a epic story. So, but it's definitely worth the read. Which I waited 20 years, basically 20 years to actually take you up on reading it. Well, take that back. The second time, first time you asked me to read it, I did the what's it, Shards of Honor? No, Free Falling was the first time, and that was stupid. And I was like, I'm not going to read this series. This is stupid. And of course, you came back and you were like, you got to give it a chance, give it a chance. And of course, Shards of Honor. And again, this is a love story. This is stupid. Why am I reading this? And at the time, I believe you and I were neck deep in Galaxy's Edge, Ember Wars. What's the other? No, Expeditionary Force. I mean, a lot of really good high action series. Oh yeah, and Undying Mercenary. So, we had a lot of action stuff going on, and this was just lame. Or at least that's how I took it. And of course, here we are, 20 years later, and I get hooked on the Sun Eater series, and I suggested to you, and you're like, sounds good. So you go ahead and take it on. And I think you were what, 2 books in before you called me up and said, "Are you kidding me? This is Vorkosigan Saga." And I was like, "No, no, 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 no." And you said, "Yeah, it follows this. I mean, it literally has the same kind of feel to it." And then I called BS, and of course, you came back later on and proved that one of his um, what's that? What's the author of Sun Eater?
Um,
I can't remember his name. He's a newer
Christopher
author.
Ruscio.
Yeah, so Christopher Ruscio apparently got a lot of his
Influence.
and ideals from Lois McMaster Bujold. Go figure. So on that, I did give it that second try, and here I am. And I think it's a great series. Great, absolutely, it's a great series, and if I think it's an overlooked series. And I think it should be, you should take the time for it because it's definitely worth it.
Well, I think we should say that Christopher Ruscio was inspired by the Vorkosigan Saga, or Lois McMaster Bujold in general. He worked at Bain Books in one interview that I read, and that she was one of the major influences on him. And she's a writer, obviously, for Bain. And, she is a powerhouse in the science fiction
Yeah, which you wouldn't
community.
notice. You wouldn't know
She's,
it.
yeah, she's, I mean, I think I've got some notes somewhere.
But while you look for those, I think that the best comparison that you can find would be those of you that have read Galaxy's Edge. It is like Galaxy's Edge being inspired by Star Wars. I mean, you can't really get much more closer than that. And I think that's very much the same scenario, but both quality. Not like they just ripped it off and rewrote it.
Right,
It's definitely
right.
quality.
Well, and I have no idea where I put those notes now, but she's one of the most award-winning authors. You know what? Maybe I emailed them to me. There we go. I did find them. So she's the 2020 Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America Grand Master, 2013 Forey Award for Lifetime Achievement, 2011 Skylark Award, 7 Hugo Awards, and 16 nominations. And Hugos are decided by the fans.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, 3 Nebulas and 8 nominations, 3 Locusts and 25 nominations, and hundreds of other awards. She's got over 195 books. The Vorkosigan Saga, which is roughly 17 books, depending on how you look at it. And then Panric and Desdemona, which I have not read, which kind of take place in the Vorkosigan world, but centuries before.
Right.
And those are more fantasy geared novels rather than science fiction. She wrote the Vorkosigan Saga between 1986 and 2018, 17 novels, 2 novellas. And of all the people that I've recommended the series to, I tell everybody to start with the second book in the series and then read them in chronological order. And the second book in the series is Shards of Honor, which does have a huge, I guess, romance component to it. But, and it's definitely, I mean, for guys that read shit like Pike Logan series and, Tom Clancy and all that kind of stuff, at first glance, that book would probably put you off to the series, but it's important because you gain an appreciation of who the parents of the main character for the rest of the series were and how he is who he is, why he is the way he is. In comparing it with the Sun Eater series, both protagonists in each series have a world set up against them, and they have to overcome sometimes unsurmountable odds. I would say that the Sun Eater series is much more visceral and like you couldn't do the Sun Eater series without it being R-rated.
Oh, no.
You couldn't do a TV series or a movie without it being R-rated. I mean, there's just no damn way.
Fact that I also think that Sun Eater, well, the way he does it, he does a lot more of the description of visual things, whereas Lois McMaster Bujold gives you a lot more of the internal thinking and feeling of most people.
Yeah,
So,
in a way like that, it's very similar to Dune, and you you get insight into what's going on inside the character's mind, and you do get some of that with Sun Eater. I mean, he does
well,
talk
right,
about
because he's got his. I mean, you get a monologue by him. That's really all you get. So for the most part, you're the story is taking place from his eyes,
yes,
whereas the Vorkosigan Saga, it's literally like you're watching an epic play.
yes,
So you
it's
get
Game
to
of
see
Thrones on a grand
right,
scale,
right,
and
and so they don't get too deep um, in the environmental descriptions. However, she is very good at giving you visuals of characters, so you can
yes,
imagine how they are. You
yep.
know, basically the kind of the world and how these Bariarans, which is where they're from, which is the home world of Miles Vorkosigan, uh, they're very cut off because for a long time, for centuries, they were cut off because the wormhole nexus they were at it collapsed, and so they had no way to get across until they found a new jump hole. Um, and so they did
Which
a lot of
I
things.
wonder if that wasn't an influence for Scalzi with the interdependency.
That's possible, you know. That's
You
that.
know, just take that one concept. What would it be like
You know what?
if the ability to travel between planets in a multi-planet empire suddenly went away?
Especially yes, when it's all based, commerce is based solely on the ability to use jump lanes. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. And that being the case, the idea that at one point that collapsed, and um, if you go into what's it? My brain just lost. Scalzi's book,
Old Man's
Imperium.
War.
No, the Imperium.
Uh,
So if you go into the Imperium, I think that you get like what it would have been like for them pre-collapse. However, you don't get any kind of heads up or any kind of detail as to um, whether they had forward notice or whatever. But I do know that once that wormhole jump collapsed, then it started the time of isolation, which throughout the series you'll hear constantly referred to. And it's, I guess, if you really want a micro, you know, example of that, be the Lord of Flies.
yeah,
You have a group that is cut off, and then they look inward, and then anything on the outside is unacceptable.
yeah. They developed
Which
their own norms, their own beliefs.
very Spartan too.
Yes, yeah, oh yes, oh yes, yes.
So
The Barry
in terms of
Arons are
Spartan, they're
definitely
very much like they don't they don't accept anybody who can't fight. So they're very military based. Well, that they are solely a military based world, and so essentially everything you're going to see is you have to be a fighter. So and it reflects Sparta in that sense because and anybody who doesn't meet that, or at least visually doesn't meet that, that criteria, then they're immediately cast aside. However, if they don't cut it in the military, there's other places that they make them go. And then if they don't make that, well then there's the outcasts, the people that are out in the fringe, but it's also built on high blood, which houses, just like, you were
yeah.
saying Game of Thrones.
It's not a feudal system, but a definitely a caste system. Um, I guess the closest analogy would probably be like uh, pre World War One Prussian society, maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and uh, and of course, when you jump into the series, they're out of the time of isolation, and they're trying to reintegrate and reestablish themselves with these other uh, planets that everybody is from Earth, obviously. So this is set way into the future, and they actually even go back to Earth and at least once, if not more.
Yeah, in fact, it's one of the postings that they have.
So
In fact, one of
they
the books actually takes place on Earth.
yes, and they're reestablishing their dominance and where so basically where the story picks up with Shards of Honor. So Falling Free, the first book in the series, takes place much earlier and uh, does not have a whole lot of bearing on the rest of the series. You're introduced to a couple of concepts and a couple of different, wouldn't call them species, but types of humans. And you get a little bit of a sense of just because I'm different from this other group of people, we automatically are not going to gel. And certain people are breaking through some of those barriers while the rest of the people in that story are fighting against it. But when you come into Shards of Honor, you're after the after the time of isolation ended and Barrier was found again. It was invaded by an enemy planet or empire called the
Closest neighbor.
Cetagandans, and they occupied Barrier for quite some time and ended up nuking part of Barrier. And the Barriarans basically led a rebellion and kicked them off the planet. And so now Barrier is trying to expand its influence. And one of the things it was doing when we come into Shards of Honor is they found that one of the wormholes that allowed the Cetagandans to invade Barrier came throughEgyar. And so they go to that planet and they start fighting another group of humans or another planetary empire called the Batons. And that's where Errol Vorkosigan and Captain. Why is my brain failing now?
Because you need it.
Miles' mom meet, and they're on obviously the opposing sides of this conflict, but there's more at work.
Cordelia Naismith.
Yes, Cordelia Naismith, Captain Naismith. And one of the things that I really love about the Vorkosigan Saga is the strong female characters. And this isn't like Disney trying to do the whole "I am woman, hear me roar" thing. The women in this series are influential and powerful while still maintaining their femininity. Femininity? I don't know. So they're not trying to be men. I mean, there's some that are, but for the most part, they are able to stand their own ground and do it in a way that you really admire them. Kind of reminds me of my mom in a lot of ways. But every character in this series is very well developed. The world is very well developed. The technology is very well developed. This series delves into every single aspect of a society that you could think of, from religion to sexuality to
Racism.
Yeah. Yeah. I
xenophobia.
mean, yep. Yep. It's everything. And
Well,
the audiobooks.
caveat on that though.
Hmm,
Caveat on that. Um, so just so people understand, this series started back in the '80s, and in the '80s, anybody, those of us that are old enough to know about the '80s, a lot of things were one, homosexuality was just becoming a broader thing where people were seeing it more often, or were not afraid to hide it, and then of course the you know introduction and spread of AIDS, and just by the way things are, it flourished in the gay community. So for Lois McMaster Bujold to write the topics that she does and touch on a lot of the things she does, it's very progressive, very progressive at the time. Now, if you look at it back now, it's like, oh, okay, whatever. And because so many other authors have taken, they basically picked up that that baton and they've run with it. Because the problem with what I've heard many science fiction critics and stuff refer to it as the Star Trek universe, where every enemy, every other alien race is just a different color human with different ears or different whatever, but it's still biped, you know, and most of them have the ability to communicate with other humans. And so I really appreciated the way that early on she not only exploited the xenophobia of the Baryarans, but also how it can go much greater and like have no boundaries like in Beta Colony. I mean, and you'll learn that Beta Colony just is wild. But the thing is that most people, and so what I understand about this is, whoops, sorry about that. Mute that. Sorry about that. Uh, so one of the things that people that I didn't really start to realize until later on, that when you're starting to when they start introducing new characters and new planets and things like that, and you start meeting people, you start to understand, or you realize that there are no quote unquote aliens. What they are is just humans that had basically colonized in different places and then started genetic, you know, meandering within genetic materials and ideas and the ambiguity of just basic sexuality is just there's the lines are crossed in so many ways based on what we would think as a regular human. And so you start to find um, there are attractions that people have because they're there. Like, the best way I could put it is, if you've never seen if you had never seen somebody of a different race and then you come upon them and there are certain let's say we'll call it norms for that race, that might immediately become something that you're attracted to, not only because it's different but because it has its own beauty. And I think that what you get here is you get a lot of things that, if you try to think of it with your own mindset, when some things happen throughout this series, the relationships that happen, they're just odd. They're odd in a way that is like, you kind of wonder where that came from, you know, and then especially from somebody like a Barry Art. But because Miles was always different. He wasn't. He's a Barry Arn by name and blood alone. That's it. Everything else about him, and of course that's half because his mother's beta colony.
Well, I think he tries to see, like, I think he imagines a better Barrier,
Well, I know,
and he
yeah, I
wants
do,
to make that happen.
but he got there. I believe that path started because he was already on the outside to begin with,
Yeah, absolutely. He would not
and
have.
so
He would have been another one of the sword
right,
rattling guys if he had
right,
been born completely normal, most likely, even with the parents that he had, simply because of his position.
right, exactly. Well, and his grandfather.
Yeah,
Um, so, you know, not to give too much in the detail, but his grandfather, when Miles was born, wanted him to be destroyed. Um, and during this period of time, Miles is basically the first child born in Barrier that's not a birth from a womb. So that's because that is something that is done in Baton Colony, um, where it's something that they call uterine replicator, which basically allows women to allows parents to, you know, basically have their child without having to carry it and without the mother having to take the stress, but also to eliminate issues that could come up.
right. They can
So,
gene clean and all of these
right,
kinds of things so that the child would be, basically flawless by the time it's born.
which is actually one of the reasons why once you figure out how to make a flawless person, well, now how do we make a better person or a different person? And there's hermaphrodites that are built, that are designed. There's a lot of people, you'll find a lot of characters, or there's a lot of people that are, because they're not really races, but a lot of um, types of people that are different because they were genetically constructed that way for specific means. A lot of them were for pleasure, a lot of them were for looks, and a lot of them were to just to be able to stay young. And of course, there's it also comes in contact with the age old question: is can you clone? Is cloning against you know against God? And then
And
some
what are
people,
the moral
right,
implications of those clones? I mean, are they a person? Do they have rights?
and that same question comes up to people that were genetically modified as well.